Hey guys, today we're going to be doing a JZ modular harness with an ECUMaster black ECU. So, let's get into it. Right, as I said, this is a JZ modular harness for an ECUMaster black, but a bit of a weird one, this one. We actually did this harness back in October 2021 for the customer as a JZX100 plug and play. So down in the description below, I'm going to link you to that original video where we went through everything of what the harness used to be like, because I'm not going to go through everything today. But what we've basically done is the customer now wants to put the engine and harness into another vehicle. So we have actually changed it from being plug and play into a JZX100 to having its own fuse box, so now it can work in any vehicle that he wants to put it into, either now or in the future if he changes his mind again. Obviously, it is running an ECUMaster black ECU. It is completely modular like you see in the original video when you go and watch that. So what have we done? Well, we have done a little bit of it, and I've got some pictures which you'll see at the end of the little changes that we did make, but I'm going to go through them with you now. So as you'll see from the JZX100, there used to be 3 body plugs that would have obviously plugged directly into the JZX100. They've now been removed. We put this plug in the middle because two of the plugs were too short to reach the fuse box. The other wires, as you can see, are just running along that and then into the fuse box over there. Now, what we also had to do is we did have to actually put the alternator wiring in, because on the JZX100, it doesn't come with the alternator wiring included. It's part of the body harness. So it comes out of there, runs all the way along here. So you can see the 2 sort of sections that pop in there. It goes through the grommet over there, pops up, goes all the way along over here, over the top over there. So I'll get my hand out of the way because the camera keeps trying to autofocus, and pops down to over here. And you can see we've got the alternator plug over there. And then that goes into the alternator. So again, because of the chassis he's putting it into, the vehicle is going to go into now, we needed to include all of the alternator wiring in there so he can just plug the main power for the alternator in. Everything else in the harness is staying exactly the same. We made some repairs on the harness because I think one of the terminals on the crank sensor plug wasn't working anymore, and I think the cam sensor plug was broken, so we have actually changed that as well. All right, so that's pretty much all the changes that we've made. We just obviously neatened it up a little bit. There's been some alterations that have been done elsewhere. Things like he's now using a Nissan idle control valve. So obviously that's all been changed prior to it coming to us. And obviously we've added in the fuse box, which is the major part over there. So that is now the major thing that we have changed. So what we're going to do now is, instead of going through the whole layout like we normally do, because again, you can watch the original video, it goes through everything here because all of the stuff hasn't changed, like the coils and injectors, etc., etc. So what we're going to go through now is the fuse box, so the customer knows exactly how to wire everything in to the new vehicle that he's going to be putting this into. So with all the harnesses, we do have the welcome packs. This is obviously just 3 of the 5 pages that you would get via email when you buy the harnesses from us. So first of all, we're going through the entire pinout of the ECU. Now, obviously, not all of the pinouts are applicable to everything. So for instance, he's not running drive-by-wire. So although drive-by-wire wiring is in the plug, he's not actually running that. He could upgrade to drive-by-wire if he so desired, but of course in this case it is not actually wired up to there. So some of the pinouts will tell you exactly where everything goes or what it can be used for, but not everything is actually utilized in these harnesses. Okay, he is using quite a lot of the stuff. So obviously he does have all of the stuff like oil pressure and temperature sensor. He does have a fuel pressure sensor as well. He is also using a gearbox harness. He's got a reverse switch. I think he's using a BMW gearbox. So he is using a lot of it, but not all of it. So going on to the connectors that he needs to connect into the vehicle now, it is again super straightforward. If you've seen any of our other videos, this 9-pin plug is going to be another repeat for you guys, but for the customer, we're going to go through it step by step. So the 9-pin plug is just over here. So remember, all of these 4 plugs are completely unique. You can't plug them into the wrong place. You don't have to worry about that at all. Okay, so this is the 9-pin plug over here. This is the one I'm going to be talking about now. So first of all, we've got our red wire, which is a big 14 gauge wire. So that is the main power for the harness. So that's where everything is getting its power from in this particular case. Now, the ECU does have what we call a battery signal or a permanent 12 volt signal. So that can be connected to permanent 12 volts. But as it is a aftermarket ECU, it can also be connected to a ignition 12 volt source. But usually due to the amps that it's going to sort of pull, most of the time little switches can't handle that, because remember, everything like the starter motor, everything is running through there. Well, at least the solenoid for the starter motor is. So I always advise normally just take it to a battery direct source rather than running through an ignition power there. Okay. Number 2 is going to be black with the yellow, and that's our start signal. So again, that's really nice and straightforward. Now in this case, with ECUMaster Black, we don't control the starter with the ECU. So in this case, it does need a 12-volt signal. So you are going to require a 12-volt signal for the starter to get the engine to crank over exactly like it was in the JZX100. Number 3 is going to be yellow with a green, and that is going to be temperature. Now in this case, because it was a JZX100, originally we did actually include a coolant temperature sensor plug, because that's what the JZX100 would have required. So that's what this one is over here, labeled as temp. So this one now comes out of the fuse box at the green with the yellow wire, whereas it normally went into the vehicle, obviously in the JZX100. Now you can obviously replace that coolant temperature sensor with whichever one you need. So as I've advised to the customer, I think he's putting it to a BMW. The best thing probably to do is try and get a BMW coolant temperature sensor. Fit that in place of where this one went on his original coolant bridge that went over here, and then obviously he can then take that directly to his dash, and because it's the same sensor the dash is looking for, it's really straightforward. Next up is number 4, and that is gray. So this is a 16 gauge gray wire, and that is going to be for your fuel pump. So that's going to give out 12 volts. You can connect that directly to your fuel pump. If you want to run a relay by the fuel pump, for whatever reason, if you've got a pump that draws a lot of current, we fuse this at about 20 amps, which is mostly fine for 90% of fuel pumps. But if you need more current, then by all means, just use that as a trigger for a relay by the fuel pump in the rear of the vehicle. No problem there at all. Right, next up is going to be 5, which is yellow with a red, and that is your check engine light. Now, as per usual with all of our fuse boxes, we've got an LED in here for the check engine light, so you can see when the system is switched on. And obviously that yellow with the red one can then be wired to your dash, which then will make the check engine light work if your vehicle is equipped with a check engine light. Again, that puts out a ground. So if your vehicle doesn't come with a check engine light, but you'd like to fit one in the dash, grab yourself an LED and you can just take that to the ground side and give an ignition 12 volts to the other side, and Bob's your uncle, you're done. Then number 6 is going to be the yellow. So again, solid yellow color, and that is going to be your tacho signal. So that is programmable from the ECU. So that's very nice as well. And obviously that can then run the tacho, and you can program that to whichever one you want. So you don't need to make any changes, need any extra devices. It can all be controlled and altered in the ECU. Obviously I've got videos on how to do that if you guys want to know how to change the tacho signal and get that working correctly. All right, and then next up is number 7, and that's going to be black with a red tracer, and that is your ignition 12 volts. So that's what's going to turn the system on, right? So that's the one you're going to take from the back of your key barrel, from your switch that you fit inside your car, whatever you want to use. That does require a 12 volts to activate, okay? So if you're going to run it through a switch, normally you'd have permanent 12 volts to the one side of the switch, and then obviously through the switch back into the ignition 12 volts, and that will then turn it on when you flick the switch. If you're using your key, just make sure that you are aware that keys have 2 12-volt positions. One is accessory, one is ignition, okay? And what you want to basically do is make sure that if you are using a multimeter and looking for the ignition switch at the back of your key barrel, what you want to do is put the key to ignition, find the 12 volts, and then what you want to do is move the key to the start position and make sure that 12 volts doesn't disappear, okay? Accessory feed, what it does is when you move the key to the start position, it cuts power to the accessory feed. So obviously that is not ideal, because if you do that, you're going to cut the power to the fuse box and to the ECU. You're going to shut everything off, including your injectors and coils, and the engine's not going to fire. And every time you release the key, everything's going to turn back on again, and it is going to drive you nuts trying to figure out what the problem is. So please make sure when you are fitting it that you give it an ignition 12 volts and not an accessory feed, okay? I do normally write all that down in here as well, so you guys, it is written in the paperwork as well. Number 8 is pink with the blue, and that is your charge light. So what I mean by that is your alternator light. So that's going to be on your dash, some people call it charge light, some people call it alternator light, etc. Anyway, that's what that is. It is a ground supply, so it goes to the ground side of an LED or the ground side of your dash, which is usually the case with most dashes and how they work. Obviously, that is coming literally directly from the alternator down here, from that 3-pin plug over there. Right, so little things to know about that alternator light. What I've seen in the past on older vehicles, so it might apply to this case as well, because an older BMW it's going into. If you have a normal bulb in your dash and your dash doesn't come fitted with some sort of diode to stop backfeeding into the alternator, then we would advise that you do fit a diode in place. If you're lucky and your dash has the ability to swap out the bulbs, and people have come along and created LED bulbs for your dash, then obviously that is perfect. you can then just literally replace your bulb with an LED, and that'll do the exact same job because LED is a light emitting diode. So it is a diode and it will stop the backfeed there. Super important because I have seen cases where vehicles have actually been kept on even when the key is turned off because it's backfeeding through the dash, through the alternator, back into the fuse box again, and causing issues there. So please make sure that if that is the case and you are turning the key off and the ignition stays on or the ECU stays on, take a look at that first. That's more than likely what your issue is there. And then lastly, number 9 is yellow with a black, and that is your oil pressure. Now, in this particular case, the customer did actually opt to have both the oil pressure switch and a Bosch oil pressure and temp sensor as well. So he does have the ability, if he's kept this one, to put a T-piece in there, fitted this one and this one in place. That yellow with the black wire is going to give out a ground, and that he can use as an oil light for his dash. Okay, so that's fine there. The only extra one on here is a plug left over from the JZX100 plug and play section, and that's what we call our auxiliary connector. So basically this is a whole bunch of stuff that is not used in the main harness itself, and it's left over. And it's mainly things like the RS232 communication, some switches, can high, can low, some auxiliaries we didn't use. We also give a signal ground and a 5 volt. So I think there's 2 analogs in there that we haven't used in the harness. So again, this is for expansion if you guys want to add some things to the system without having to sort of chop and change all the wiring inside the ECU. So as you can see here, the only ones that are not populated is basically the EGTs over there. But obviously, if you wanted to fit 6 EGTs, I'm presuming you use some kind of CAN to EGT device, and in which case then you could connect the CAN from that up to the EGT device and then run EGTs in your exhaust if you wanted to. Okay. Right, so that's pretty much it in terms of the actual additions that we've done, gone through the fuse box, all the connectors and everything for that. So what I'm going to do now is pop away. We're going to come back and we're going to do some testing. We're going to test obviously with the plenum off. So we want to make sure all of the coils are firing, the injectors are firing. Then what I'm going to do is pop away. We're going to put all the inlet manifold back on again. We'll use the dumb coils that originally run with that because luckily the ECUMaster Black can run the dumb coils without an igniter, which is wonderful. And obviously then we'll actually fire the engine up, and I'll be changing out these throttle harnesses and so on to work with the 2JZ VVTi throttle body, which is drive-by-wire. Okay, so bear with me and I'll be back in a second, guys. Right, guys, sorry, I nearly forgot. I didn't go through the last 3 wires that we have in the fuse box connector, which is the 6-pin plug over there. And that is going to be, in this case, pin 1 is orange. That is reverse. That's going to give 12 volts when the reverse switch is connected. Obviously, that's in the case of this harness, he is using a reverse switch. Pin number 2 is a solid red. That would be a speed signal. So if you decided to connect a speed sensor to the gearbox sub harness, that is where the signal would come through. And obviously number 3 is the speed sensor ground. Now we do that because normally in Toyotas, they take the ground of the speed sensor to the cluster so that the cluster and the speed sensor are grounded at the same place, therefore avoiding ground loops. All right, so back in a second with the testing for you guys. Right, guys, so now we're back for the testing, and as per usual, it is going to be made up of 2 parts, one with just the ignition on and one with the engine actually running. Clearly, as you can see now, we're going to be testing with just the ignition on. This engine isn't running in its current configuration. So first thing I'm going to do is let's go through all the tests that we are going to carry out today so you can see what we're going to come up against when we do it. Then we'll jump straight into the testing with the ignition on. So with the ignition on, there's going to be a few tests, not an extensive amount, but yeah, we're going to make sure, first of all, that the check engine light works. We're going to make sure the oil pressure and the alternator light work. So in this case, we're going to have check engine light in the top there. We're going to have battery, and we're going to have oil pressure light coming on there. What I'll then do is I'll unplug the sensors like the oil pressure one at a time, and you'll see the light goes off to make sure that that is the correct wire going to there. Then what I'm going to do is we're going to jump over to the laptop over there, and then we're going to test the injectors and the coils. So I can use the ECU to fire the injectors and the coils, and therefore we'll know exactly if they are working exactly as we expect them to. Next up is going to be the TPS, the IAT, and the coolant temperature. So in this case, because a 3UZ throttle has the same TPS as a JZ, I'm just going to push the throttle blade open, and we'll check the TPS value on there, go from a small voltage to a higher voltage as we do that. We'll also make sure the IAT and the coolant temperature are working. Now that is in relation to the ECU. So again, we can unplug the coolant temperature sensor down here. We can also unplug the IAT sensor, which is just over there, and make sure that the ECU goes to its default values when they disconnect, and go back to reading an actual value when they are connected again. Then obviously drive-by-wire I've got not applicable because in this case we don't have drive-by-wire. And that's all the tests with the ignition on, and then we have the engine running, so it's going to be testing the starter circuits. I just want to make sure that when I touch the black with the yellow wire with 12 volts, that the starter motor engages. That's what we're looking for there. We're also, once the engine is running, going to make sure the tacho works. So we're making sure we've got a signal coming through there. And then what we want to do is I'll run the engine for a bit to warm it up. So on our coolant temperature gauge over there, we should see some temperature coming through. That will then tell me that obviously the yellow with the green wire over there is connected correctly. And if you guys have any interest at all, but the two JZ GE VVTIs, you'll see there's a brass fitting over there. You can actually take that out and fit a JZX100 sensor in, funnily enough. So there's the one for the temp ECU, and there's the one for that. Obviously, you guys with your GTEs, all your coolant temperature sensors are in the water bridge coming out over here. Okay, so you guys don't have to worry about that. But if two JZ GE VVTI guys, you can get a temperature signal from a second bung in the cylinder head there. Okay, right, so let's jump into it. And first thing we're going to do is put the ignition on, and that's going to then kick off the testing of all the lights. So bear with me a second while I do that. I'm just going to balance the phone over here. Rightio, so now that my hands are free, you can probably hear all the beeping going away there. Right, so obviously I've connected the black with the red to 12 volts. Everything is turned on now. You can see we've got our alternator light, we've got our battery light, and we've got our oil light over there. So that's exactly what we want to see. So first thing I'm going to do, obviously the check engine light, I can't turn that off, so to speak, but I'm going to unplug the oil pressure switch over here now. And as soon as I do, you're going to see the oil pressure light is going to turn off. There you go, plug it back in again, and it goes back on again. Okay, so same thing over here. We're just going to disconnect the alternator. So you can see I'm just disconnecting the alternator over there. And you can see our alternator light has now gone off. So that's perfect, exactly what we want to see. Okay, plug the alternator back in again. And obviously, alternator light comes straight back on again. So super happy with that. Right, so that's the alternator light. Next up, let's do the injectors and coils. Now, it's nice and quiet here. It is the evening time. So hopefully we're going to be able to hear all these injectors clicking away as I activate the testing. So again, nice and simple. I've got a nice video on how to test all your outputs. So you just go in the corner there, test outputs, and now I can select each one as I want. So let's go for injector 1. Okay, and there you go. You can hear that injector clicking away. Let's go to injector number 2. There you go. Injector number 3. There you go. And injector number 4. There you go. Obviously, I've not put fuel in the rail, guys, so I'm not squirting into the cylinder here. Injector 5. At the back over there. And lastly, injector 6. Right, okay, so that's a very brief test. Obviously, what I would normally do is I would test injector 1, then I would unplug injector 1, test it again, and make sure it's injector 1 is injector 1, and not injector 1 is injector 2, etc. Or you can actually feel the injector with your fingers if you have incredibly sensitive feeling. You can then feel the injector actually pulsing as you do that. Next up is going to be the coils, and again, I'm going to do the exact same thing here. You're just going to hopefully hear them click. So let's go for number 1. Again, hopefully you heard that. Let's go to coil number 2. There you go. That valve must be open because you can hear it through the exhaust. Let's go to number 3. I think that's the inlet valve open because I can hear it out the other side over there. Coil number 4. And that one's slightly open valve because you can hear it better than number 1. Number 5. And that's fully closed. That's very, very quiet, that one. And number 6. Again, sounds like they're coming out the exhaust hole there, so that must have an exhaust valve open. Right, okay, so again, same with the other one, what I would normally do is obviously I would test coil 1, make sure it fired, lift out coil 1 or unplug it, test coil 1 again and make sure that it wasn't firing to make sure that coil 1 was coil 1. Obviously, I've done that off camera, guys. But again, I don't want to make a 45-minute long video of going through every single thing. So those are the injectors and coils done. Right, so what are we going to be testing next? It's going to be TPS, IAT, and coolant temp. Right, so what I'm going to do is have a look down here, and you can see that we've got our TPS value over there. And basically all I'm going to do now is just use this throttle. And I'm going to push it open, and as you can hopefully see down there, we're on 43. 70, and then I let go again, back to 6%. So hopefully you can see that. It's a little bit small, but yeah, so that's fine. So then we're going to go over to the coolant temperature. So right now we can see our coolant temp is 16 degrees. That's quite good, because obviously if it was less than 16, if the coolant temp and the IAT are pretty much the same on a bone cold engine, that's actually a good sign that your calibrations are correct. So all I'm going to do now is I'm just going to unplug one of these wires on the coolant temperature sensor plug over here. And as soon as I do that, it defaults to its default value or failure value, which is 80 degrees. So give me a second. Okay, plug it back in again. In the right place. And it pops back to 16 degrees, so that's perfect. Right, so we're going to do exactly the same thing on the IAT temperature sensor over here. I'm just going to unplug that. Pop over to here, and you see that has defaulted to 25 degrees. So if you watch my other videos, you can actually set what I call it the default value. It's actually what we call the failure value. So if the sensor was to fail, it's what it defaults to. Now this can be useful because sometimes guys like Toyota originally actually set it to about minus 40 degrees. Obviously that would then cause your ECU to overfuel, and obviously a rich is better than lean if something does happen to go wrong. So again, it's completely up to you guys. The defaults on ECUmaster are 80 degrees for coolant, 25 for air temp. The defaults of the Toyota are minus 40. I think the lowest you can go on the ECUmaster is minus 30. So I normally set it to about minus 30, which would then cause the engine to run rich if there was a failure. And obviously a rich is better than lean if something was to go wrong. So there's the mindset over there. Right, so again, we've done coolant temp, we've done TPS, and we've done IAT. So that's all the ignition on testing that we are going to do now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this engine back together again. We're going to put the dumb coils in, get my sub harness so I can plug in all the coils. All the injectors and everything are going to stay the same. We'll put the throttle on. I'm actually going to attach the drive-by-wire throttle for the 2JZ because that's what we're going to be using the ECU to run. In this particular case, I can get it to idle nicely. And I'll get it warmed up a little bit so that obviously we can see some coolant temperature coming through on the dash there. So, be a long time for me, but I'll see you guys in a second. Right, guys, now back for the testing with the engine actually running. So obviously we've got everything back on now. Our intake is on. We have obviously our drive-by-wire and everything hooked up with our own sub-harness that we have there. We've got all the dumb coils hooked up with our own harness over there as well. Remember, the ECUmaster Black can fire these JZ dumb coils directly from the ECU. It does not actually require an igniter to do so, but you are able to use the igniter if you want as well. Okay. Right, so as I said, it's going to be a really nice simple test, to be honest with you. We're going to be testing the starter circuit, so just going to touch the black with the yellow wire to 12 volts. That's going to then start the engine. We're then going to look and make sure that we're getting a tacho signal through over there, and then I'll reference it against the PC, so we'll see the figure over there as well. Okay, right, so what I'm going to do now is basically I'm going to put the ignition on. So if you bear with me a second, I'm just going to put the camera down over there. Okay, so we're just going to literally turn the ignition on. Right, so you can see we've got all the lights on there, the battery light, the oil light over there. We've got the check engine light over there. And all I'm going to do now is start her up. So 1, 2, 3. Okie dokie. So exactly what I wanted to happen, we touched the black with the yellow wire to 12 volts, and then the engine has fired up. And as you can see, she's running nice and smooth there, so no dramas there at all. And obviously, let's go ahead and look at our tacho. So you can see there we're on just about 1,000 RPM. And if I move over, you can see there we're at about 1,000 RPM. So that is absolutely perfect. And looking at coolant temperature over there, you can see we've got coolant temperature showing up on the dash over there with our yellow and green wire. And obviously you can see the coolant temperature over there is showing in the corner just over there. Okay. We'll give her a little bit of a rev to make sure she is working exactly as we expected. Okay. Alright, so let me kill that down. Right, fantastic. Okay, so everything is exactly as we expected to. She runs, she drives, she idles really nicely. Obviously, I'm using the drive-by-wire, just bearing in mind the original customer has the non-VVTi version. He's obviously using a Nissan idle control valve to take care of the idle, but that's already been mapped on his original map, so that's no problem there at all. Okay, so, and again, with these ones, diagnostics obviously is in the software of the ECU. You want to be using that to do any sort of diagnostics you want to carry out there. You can see in this case, obviously the oil light and the battery light and the check engine light do go off when the engine is running. Again, you can actually set the parameters for the check engine light in the ECU itself. So again, you can know exactly what's going to cause a check engine light to come on. But yeah, from this side, we're super happy that everything is there. Obviously, we wanted to test it all nicely because we've changed the whole entire power supply of the harness to make sure that everything is working as expected to. But thanks for watching, guys. If you do have any questions, please let us know down below. If there's anything you'd like to know, obviously this is a very unique harness. It's not something we would generally offer. Obviously we did the JZX100 plug and play originally, and now we've adapted this to fit into another vehicle. So it's not a off-the-shelf version. If you're looking for our JZ harnesses that work with ECUmaster Black, Link, ECU, Haltech, etc., you can find those in the Link and Haltech and ECUmaster playlist that we have on the YouTube channel. And there you'll see all the harnesses that we offer in that regard. But anyway, thanks for watching, guys. Again, if you like the video, you can like it. If you want to subscribe to see more of these videos, obviously do that and subscribe as well. But now we'll cut some photos of the engine harness, obviously complete and everything. And then we'll see you guys in a bit when we carry on with some other harness testing as well. So see you in a minute, guys. Bye-bye.
Never break, always fight, never quit, do it right, play the game, win it life, have no shame, there's no time, feel the pain, live the grind, I could change, in my mind, pick a lane, commit and climb, the only way to win it life. I never miss, that's fact, taking big swings, put your hand to the bat, put me in the ring, you'll go out in a bag, cause I sing what I mean and I bring it to the mad light. Ain't got time to kill, I got time to feel, I took the red pill, I know life's short so I wanna live real, but how's it supposed to feel?